This is where our story this morning that we've heard time, perhaps, and time again begins. So I invite you to hear the word of the Lord this morning from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 11, beginning in verse 1, and it goes like this. When Jesus and his followers approached Jerusalem, they came to Bethphage and Bethany at the Mount of Olives. Jesus gave two disciples a task, saying to them, "Go into the village over there. As soon as you enter it, you will find tied up there a colt that no one has ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone says to you, 'Why are you doing this?' say, 'Its master needs it,' and he will send it back right away." They went and found a colt tied to a gate outside on the street, and they untied it. Some people standing around said to them, "What are you doing untying the colt?" They told them just what Jesus said, and they left them alone. They brought the colt to Jesus and threw their clothes upon it, and he sat on it. Many people spread out their clothes on the road, while others spread out branches cut from the fields. Those in front of him and those following were shouting, "Hosanna! Blessing on the one who comes in the name of the Lord! Blessings on the kingdom of our ancestor David! Hosanna in the highest!" Jesus entered Jerusalem and went into the temple. After he looked around at everything, because it was already late in the evening, he returned to Bethany with the 12. This is good news for all people. Jesus loved to teach in parables, but he didn't restrain his teaching to just the oral kind of speaking about them. No, Jesus learned how to live the parables. And what I mean by that is he understood who he was called to be. Of course he did. I think sometimes those moments when we say that, we're kind of like, yeah, obviously he knew who he came to be. But he still had to learn about it while he was here. He had to study the Hebrew text. He had to deeply understand what the people were looking for so that they might see the signs. And everything begins here with the ultimate triumphal entry. And he knew exactly what would play out, play by play, as soon as he crossed the threshold back into Jerusalem. He knew it because he was a living parable, because he had studied the words of the prophet Isaiah. Second Isaiah, if you want to get really technical. You may or may not realize this, but we actually know there were at least 3 Isaiahs in the book of the prophet Isaiah because of the amount of time that it spans. And that was common, to pass the mantle from one to the next to the next. And so Deutero Isaiah, we have what we know as the servant songs. And the servant songs speak exactly of what the Messiah will come to do and who he will come to be for us. And yes, it's passages that we read around Christmas time about a child being born in Bethlehem, but it's also a passage that tells us that he will come and he won't be known for who he was, that he will come and they will pull his hair out from his beard, that he will be slapped, that he will be spit upon, that he will be beaten, and that he will be put to death. Jesus was a living parable, and he understood that for a moment the people might see it, but they would soon forget the servant songs again. Because the people that day were likely not thinking of the servant songs at the triumphal entry, because they saw him. He entered through the right gate and he came down the Mount of Olives. The Mount of Olives is steep, y'all. I've walked the path myself, and I can't tell you, I lost count of the number of times that our tour guide in the Holy Land, as we came up to walk the Palm processional path, said, "If you don't think you can do it, please don't do it. A car cannot come rescue you halfway down the Palm processional. It is a skinny trail and it is steep. It's easier to jog down it from the steep grade than it is to walk the path down." And have you ever ridden a donkey as an adult? I have. And I laughed the entire way through it. And I was on flat ground, not on some clothes. I was on a saddle. not on some clothes tossed over and going down a steep grade. But that's what Jesus did. And he rode down, I imagine, with more grace than I could ever possess in my body, down the hill of the Mount of Olives and through that gate. And the people cry out, Hosanna, because they see that the Messiah has come. But again, they have forgotten the servant songs. Instead, what they see is they see someone who has come to save them from the very real oppressive nature that they lived under Rome, who occupied Jerusalem. And so the people, I imagine, as they cried out, Hosanna, believed that battle might take place in that very moment. That God had finally come, but they weren't worried if they had to draw swords because they would have the power of God on their side in that moment. And the zealots in the crowd, I imagine, were longing to draw their swords. They had been waiting for this moment. And I imagine at first they thought, where's the white war horse? But then they probably chuckled and thought, a colt? Of course he comes in on a nursing donkey because that's going to smite Rome. The mighty Rome toppled by a mother nursing donkey. That's hilarious. That's what the people likely kept thinking. They forgot the servant songs. But I wonder if in that crowd there was one or two or a scattered handful of faithful Jewish people who knew the words of the prophet Isaiah and saw Jesus coming through that golden gate and thought of the words of the prophet and knew what was about to come. I wonder if any of them for a moment cried out a bittersweet Hosanna, knowing that their Messiah must come but would die on their behalf. And so all they could offer would be their praise and worship of joining their voices in the hosannas, blessing on the one who has come in the name of the Lord. I imagine the disciples even got caught up in the glory and majesty and parade of it all, the processional, because they too, it tells us again and again in Mark and Matthew and Luke, that Jesus told them 3 times that the Son of Man, the Son of God, the Messiah, me, I will have to be put to death. And every single time he told them 3 times. Every single time they said, no, you don't know what you're talking about, Jesus. I wonder if any of the disciples in that moment reconnected to those words and understood what was about to unfold. Can we hold on to the servant songs, knowing what is coming this week? Because this is the triumphal entry, and we shout out our hosannas, and we love the joy that our children bring as they process around with the palms, as we should, because we know the end of the story. But let us not jump to Easter just yet. Let us be willing to walk the passion this week with our Christ. Because when we're willing to go with Christ, through the offering of his body, through his death on the cross, through the confusion of his time in the tomb before we arrive at next Sunday, then that is what reminds us that no matter the darkest moments of our life, that Christ will walk with us through them all, because Christ has walked them himself. He has been through the darkest moments of his life, and he can walk with us. So let us not, I know, I'm excited for next Sunday, but let us not jump there just yet. Can we hold the tension today and this week of the bittersweet Hosanna? That we know the end of the story, but we know what we have to go through to get to the end of the story. So how do we do it? How do we hold the pain of what's to come? How do we hold death? We do it because of our baptismal vow. because in the waters of baptism that we are covered in, we are covered in the reminder that nothing can separate us from the love of God, even death. And we were reminded that at Ash Wednesday when we donned ashes, and we're reminded that from dust we came and to dust we shall return. And this week of Holy Week, we walk the Passion with our Christ, knowing that we can go through the darkest moments of life and know that God will be good and present and alive on the other side of death and will greet us there because of the vows and covenants found in our baptism.